Michael Jordan sees a single dad teaching his kids basketball, then steps in silently. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Mark Thompson had always dreamed of teaching his kids the game of basketball, but life had never been kind enough to offer him an easy path. A single father in his mid-30s, Mark had faced numerous challenges, balancing a full-time job with raising two young kids, trying to be both a provider and a guide. His love for basketball had been passed down from his own father, and though Mark had never made it far in the sport, it had always been a way to connect with his past and with the world around him. He had tried to share that passion with his children, Ethan and Lily, as best as he could. Weekends were for basketball in the driveway. Mark had a small, half-worn hoop on the side of the house, and it wasn't much, but it was enough. Ethan, at 11, had inherited his father's height and a decent shot. Lily, 9, was still working on her dribbling but showed flashes of natural ability. On Saturday afternoons, they would shoot hoops, run drills, and have impromptu one-on-one games. Mark pushed them, not to become the next LeBron James or Kobe Bryant, but to understand the value of discipline, teamwork, and perseverance. Every time they improved, it felt like a small victory. Yet, there was always something gnawing at Mark. He wasn't able to give them the things other kids had. He couldn't afford to send them to summer basketball camps or buy them the latest gear. There was no money for basketball tickets, and even when the local team played just a few miles away, Mark couldn't justify the expense. But there was still one thing he could give them: his time. Every Saturday afternoon, rain or shine, he would be there, teaching them not just basketball, but life lessons he had learned the hard way. His love for the game had shaped him, and he wanted it to do the same for them. As much as Mark tried to make it about the game, he couldn't help but tell them stories of his own basketball idols, the players who had made the game seem like magic. Michael Jordan had been his hero, the player who defined greatness for a generation. He told Ethan and Lily about Jordan's work ethic, about his relentless drive to be the best, and how, for years, the sport had felt like it belonged to him. Mark had spent countless hours watching Jordan play, sitting in front of the TV, mesmerized by his every move, believing that if he worked hard enough, he too could rise above. Even now, with the years gone by, Jordan was still the figure Mark looked to as the epitome of what was possible through hard work and dedication. But while Mark tried to instill the same work ethic in his kids, he always wondered if he was doing enough. He'd seen the struggles, the distractions that came with growing up in a world so different from the one he had known. His children were smart, capable, but the constant push for success in school, sports, and everything else left him questioning if they truly understood the effort it took to succeed at something. And though they loved basketball, he knew that without the same focus and determination Jordan had, they might never achieve anything close to the greatness that had always eluded him. One day, as he was coaching Ethan on his jump shot, Mark couldn't help but think back to his own childhood. His father had been there for him, showing him the fundamentals and giving him the foundation he needed, just as he was trying to do for his kids now. But where Mark had been driven by a sense of self-doubt and a lack of resources, he wanted to offer his children something different: confidence, the belief that they could achieve their dreams no matter their background. As Ethan adjusted his form and took another shot, Mark felt a familiar, bittersweet ache. He knew that he couldn't offer his kids the fame or success that someone like Michael Jordan had achieved. But he could give them something just as important: the belief that basketball, like life, was about more than just winning. It was about working through the tough moments, finding joy in the process, and learning to lean on the lessons of failure. Mark had learned these things the hard way, but he had always believed in the game. And in his heart, he hoped that Ethan and Lily could find the same passion he had, whether they reached the heights of their heroes or not. That afternoon, the trio spent hours in the driveway. Ethan and Lily were competitive, always pushing each other to do better. Mark enjoyed these moments, watching his children try new tricks, make mistakes, and laugh together. As the sun began to set, he gathered them around for a quick talk. "All right, you two," Mark said with a grin. "What's the most important thing we're working on this year?" Ethan, tired but focused, replied, "Getting better." Lily added, "And having fun." Mark smiled, proud of them both. Exactly. And remember, every time you make a mistake, that's just part of getting better. Nobody's perfect, not even Michael Jordan. But you keep pushing forward. They all laughed together, and Mark felt a deep sense of satisfaction in the simplicity of the moment. It wasn't about the accolades or the grand gestures. It was about sharing something real with his kids, something that mattered to him, something he hoped would matter to them, too. Little did Mark know, that afternoon would be the beginning of something far greater than he could have ever imagined. It wasn't just another day on the basketball court. It would soon become the catalyst for a life-changing encounter, a moment that would shape his family's future in ways they couldn't yet understand. What started as a simple fatherly gesture, trying to instill love for the game, would soon intertwine with the very greatness that Mark had always dreamed of, but never thought possible. Unbeknownst to him, fate had just delivered a surprise. And the impact of that surprise would ripple through their lives, forever altering their relationship with the game they loved. The story of Mark Thompson, his kids, and Michael Jordan was about to unfold in a way that no one could have predicted. And it would all begin with a simple act of passion, on a quiet afternoon in a suburban driveway. It was a late afternoon, and Mark Thompson was setting up for another one of their weekend sessions. Ethan was shooting around while Lily was dribbling the ball, her movements awkward but full of determination. Mark, standing a few feet away, watched his children. There was something incredibly fulfilling about this moment, watching his kids work hard at something that had always brought him joy. Basketball had been his escape as a child, and it was something he now wanted to pass on to them. But deep down, Mark knew that no matter how hard he tried, there were limits to what he could give them. His resources were limited, his energy stretched thin, and though he worked as hard as he could, there were things outside his control. They had their moments, though. Ethan had recently made a breakthrough in his shooting technique, and Lily had started improving her dribbling. Mark made sure to celebrate every small win with them. It was never about turning them into professional players, but he did hope they learned from the game the same lessons it had taught him: hard work, patience, and the ability to overcome challenges. Just as he was offering a few shooting tips to Ethan, he saw a black SUV slowly pull up in front of his house. At first, Mark thought it was just a neighbor, but as the car stopped, he noticed the driver getting out, a tall man, dressed casually, with a relaxed demeanor. Mark paused, squinting, trying to figure out if he knew the man. The man made his way toward the driveway, and it took Mark only a moment longer to realize who he was. His breath caught in his throat. It was Michael Jordan. The Michael Jordan, the man Mark had idolized his entire life, the man whose name was synonymous with basketball greatness. Mark's heart raced. He stood frozen for a moment, unable to believe what was happening. Jordan walked up to the driveway, casually glancing around as if he was just another guy walking through the neighborhood. Mark found himself speechless. His mind raced, trying to think of something to say, but it felt like everything he had planned for this moment, everything he had imagined in his head, flew right out the window. "Hey, you guys mind if I watch for a bit?" Michael asked, his voice low and warm, without a hint of ego. Mark finally snapped out of his stunned silence, trying to find words that wouldn't make him sound ridiculous. Sure, of course," Mark stammered, still shocked by the surreal situation. Michael smiled and nodded as he casually took a seat on the curb, propping his elbows on his knees as he watched Ethan take another shot. Mark stood silently for a moment, watching Jordan, his mind spinning. He had imagined this moment so many times in his life. He'd pictured himself meeting Michael Jordan, talking basketball, maybe even asking for advice on how to make his own game better. But the reality was so different. This wasn't some orchestrated moment in front of fans. This was just a chance encounter, a random meeting that Mark never could have imagined. It was hard for him to process. The man who had inspired him and countless others, who had been the face of basketball greatness for so long, was now just sitting there, watching his son practice basketball. There was no entourage, no cameras. Just Michael Jordan, sitting on the curb as casually as if he was a neighbor. "All right, Ethan, let's see that form again," Mark said, trying to get back into coach mode as best as he could. Ethan, who had been oblivious to who was watching him, lined up another shot. This time, Mark noticed a slight adjustment in his son's stance, a little more focus, as if sensing something was off. And that's when it happened. His shot swished clean through the net. Michael, still sitting on the curb, nodded approvingly. "Nice shot. You've got some good form there," he said. Ethan looked over at the man in surprise. He had been too focused to notice, but now that he realized who was standing there, he froze. "Wait, are you?" Ethan's voice trailed off, the realization hitting him like a ton of bricks. Mark, still a little dumbfounded himself, quickly stepped in. "Yeah, that's Michael Jordan, buddy." The recognition was instant. Ethan's eyes widened, and his mouth dropped open. Lily, who had been bouncing the ball nearby, looked over at her brother's reaction and immediately realized what was happening. Both of them stood in stunned silence for a moment. "Nice to meet you," Michael said casually, standing up and walking over to shake Ethan's hand. "You've got a good shot. Keep working on it." The kid stood there in disbelief, not entirely sure how to respond, but Michael didn't let the awkwardness linger. He smiled and turned to Mark. "You mind if I join in for a little bit?" Mark, still processing everything, managed to find his words. "Of course, but, just so you know, we're not pros or anything." Michael laughed. "That's okay. I'm just here to help, not to show off." Mark could hardly believe it. Michael Jordan wasn't just standing there, he was offering to help, to get involved in the game with his kids. It wasn't the kind of interaction he had ever imagined, but it felt oddly natural. Jordan had always been known for his work ethic and competitive spirit, and even now, in retirement, there was something about him that made everything feel more important. The next few minutes were surreal. Michael stepped onto the driveway, picked up the ball, and began showing Ethan a few tricks. Mark just watched, standing to the side, feeling as if he were witnessing something extraordinary, an experience that no one could have prepared him for. Michael didn't demand attention. He didn't try to take over the practice. Instead, he simply worked with the kids, giving them pointers, encouraging them when they made a good shot, and offering constructive advice when they missed. He wasn't there to perform for the crowd. He was just being himself, sharing his knowledge in a way that felt effortless but impactful. As the sun started to dip lower in the sky, Mark realized that what was happening was more than just a basketball practice. This moment was about something bigger, about the connection between generations, the passing down of not just skills, but the value of hard work and the love of the game. Watching his kids interact with their idol, learning from him in ways that Mark could never have imagined, made him realize how important this was, not just for them, but for him as well. After a while, Michael stood up and gave the kids a final bit of advice. "All right, I've got to head out, but keep practicing. You've got the right mindset, just stay focused. This game is as much about heart as it is about skill." Mark thanked him profusely, but Michael simply waved it off, as if it was no big deal. "It was my pleasure," he said before turning and walking back to his SUV, leaving Mark and the kids to absorb what had just happened. As the car pulled away, Ethan and Lily stood in stunned silence for a moment. Then, in unison, they turned to their dad. "Did that just happen?" Ethan asked, his voice full of awe. Mark nodded slowly, a smile tugging at his lips. "Yeah, it happened." In the days that followed, Mark and his kids couldn't stop talking about what had happened. For Ethan and Lily, Michael Jordan wasn't just an abstract figure on TV anymore. He was someone who had stepped into their world, someone who had taken the time to show them what made the game great, and how important it was to work hard every day, no matter where you came from. For Mark, it wasn't about the chance to meet his idol, it was about the joy of seeing his children's eyes light up, knowing they had witnessed something they would carry with them for the rest of their lives. In that quiet moment, on a humble driveway, Mark realized that sometimes the most unexpected events were the ones that could change everything. And this one moment would forever be etched in his family's story. The days after Michael Jordan's impromptu visit were surreal for Mark and his kids. Mark had never expected something like that to happen, and the gravity of the moment started to settle in as they reflected on it. For Ethan and Lily, it wasn't just about meeting Michael Jordan, it was about the lessons he had shared in such an unexpected, down-to-earth way. Ethan had been practicing his jump shot the following morning, trying to remember some of the small adjustments Michael had shown him, and he couldn't stop talking about the experience. Mark watched them both, his heart swelling with pride, but there was also a quiet realization inside him. The impact of that encounter had shifted something in their family. It wasn't just about basketball anymore. It was about how a simple act of kindness, a quiet moment of mentorship, could ripple out into something far greater than a game. They hadn't just met a legend, they had learned that greatness could be achieved through humility, patience, and a willingness to give back. Michael Jordan hadn't walked into their lives just to give them tips on basketball. He had shown them how to live with heart, how to approach challenges with the same drive he had used throughout his career. For Mark, it was more personal. He had admired Jordan for years, had followed his career, and yet, in that brief interaction, Michael had taught him something just as valuable about leadership, giving back, and how small actions can sometimes have the biggest impact. Mark had always believed in giving his best to his kids, but Michael's quiet example reminded him of the importance of being a guide, not just in the moments when things were easy, but especially when things were tough. The visit wasn't just a moment of inspiration, it was a call to action, one that Mark didn't take lightly. As the days went by, Mark found himself thinking more and more about how he could help Ethan and Lily reach their fullest potential. It wasn't about winning championships or making them into NBA players. It was about giving them the tools to succeed at whatever they put their minds to. He knew they had the talent and the drive, but that meeting with Michael had shown him that sometimes it wasn't just about pushing harder. It was about understanding how to approach life with a sense of humility and gratitude, something that Michael had always exemplified, even in the spotlight. The following weekend, Mark decided to step things up a notch. He took the kids to a local basketball clinic, a chance for them to meet other kids their age who loved the game as much as they did. It wasn't the most professional setting, but Mark saw it as an opportunity for them to grow and to connect with others who shared their passion. As they arrived at the gym, Mark's thoughts immediately wandered back to Michael's visit. He could still hear Michael's calm voice, giving Ethan the simple but profound advice about the game: keep practicing and stay humble. Ethan was excited to show off his newfound shooting form, and Lily was determined to prove that she could keep up with the boys at the clinic. As they ran drills, Mark noticed how much more confident they both seemed. Ethan was less afraid to take the tough shots, and Lily was pushing herself harder than she ever had. Mark realized that Michael hadn't just given them advice that day, he had planted a seed in them, a belief in their own abilities. And it wasn't just the kids who had grown, Mark had felt the weight of the lesson, too. He had started to see himself as not just their father, but as someone who could help guide them through challenges, someone who could show them how to stay focused and grounded, just like Michael had done. It wasn't just about basketball anymore. The lessons were much bigger than that. Mark began to reflect on his own life, on the challenges he had faced as a single parent, and how he had struggled to balance his love for the game with the responsibilities of raising his children. He realized that, in some ways, he had been trying to shield them from the difficulties he had faced, when in fact, those struggles were part of what made him who he was. Now, he wanted to show them that facing adversity, learning from it, and growing stronger was just as important as winning. Later that evening, after the clinic, Mark sat down with Ethan and Lily. They were exhausted but happy, their minds buzzing with all the new things they had learned. Mark had been quiet during the ride home, but now he wanted to share something with them. "Hey, guys," he began, his voice serious but warm. "I want to talk to you about something. About what we do with everything we've learned today. You both have a lot of potential, but it's not just about being the best. It's about how you approach the game and life. It's about sticking with it when things get tough, and finding the lessons even in the failures." Ethan nodded, his enthusiasm still palpable. "You mean like what Michael Jordan said?" Mark smiled. "Exactly. He didn't get to where he did just by being the best player on the court. He worked harder than anyone. And he knew that every time he lost or made a mistake, it was an opportunity to get better." Lily piped up from the back seat. "So, it's not just about winning?" "No, it's about doing the work, being disciplined, and learning from everything you do. Winning comes from that. But the important thing is that you're growing as a person, too. Because basketball is just one part of life. They sat quietly for a moment, the weight of Mark's words sinking in. They had seen Michael Jordan's greatness on TV, on posters in their room, but this was the first time they truly understood the depth of his success. It wasn't just about talent, it was about the kind of person he had become because of all the challenges he faced. Mark didn't just want them to succeed in basketball, he wanted them to understand the value of hard work, humility, and the importance of staying grounded. That was the real lesson he hoped they would take away from everything. Over the next few weeks, Mark and his kids continued practicing, but the mood had shifted. They no longer saw each practice as a struggle to get better just for the sake of improvement. They were enjoying the game, the process of learning, and the time they spent together. Mark realized that this shift in perspective, inspired by Michael Jordan's quiet mentorship, had given them all something they hadn't expected, a sense of joy in the struggle. They weren't just working to be better players, they were learning to appreciate the journey, to see every setback as a step forward. Mark's life had never been easy, but the lessons Michael had unknowingly imparted had given him the clarity to see that it wasn't just about the end goal. It was about how you got there. And now, he wasn't just teaching his kids basketball, he was teaching them how to approach life with the same passion, focus, and humility that had driven Michael Jordan to the heights of greatness. He could only hope that one day, they would look back at these days and realize how much they had shaped them, just as the lessons Mark had learned as a child had shaped him. As the weeks turned into months, Mark saw his kids grow not just in their basketball skills, but in their character. They faced challenges with more patience, and they learned to find joy in their mistakes, knowing they were part of the process. And when the time came for their first big basketball tournament, Mark was no longer just cheering them on to win. He was cheering them on to learn, to grow, and to enjoy every moment they spent on the court. Because that was the real victory. The tournament day arrived, and Mark couldn't help but feel a sense of nervous anticipation as he watched Ethan and Lily prepare for their first real competition. They had practiced relentlessly over the past few weeks, and Mark could see the improvement in their game. They were no longer just playing for fun, they were playing with purpose. He had seen them grow in more ways than one, not just in basketball skills but in their character and attitude. The lessons he had tried to teach them were beginning to click, and Michael Jordan's quiet guidance seemed to resonate deeper than any basketball drill ever could. As Mark watched them stretch and warm up, he felt a mixture of pride and anxiety. It wasn't just about the game for him anymore. It was about seeing if all the lessons they'd learned would hold up under pressure. The stakes weren't high, this wasn't an NBA final, but it felt just as important. Mark wanted to see how they would handle adversity, how they would respond to mistakes, and whether they would support each other as a team, just like they had practiced. Ethan seemed to be the most nervous of the two. Mark noticed his son pacing slightly before the game started, wiping his hands on his shorts and trying to calm his nerves. It was clear that Ethan understood the importance of the day. He wanted to play well, not just for himself, but for his dad, for his sister, and for the memory of Michael Jordan's advice. Mark stepped up to him, clapping him on the back. "Hey, you got this," Mark said with a smile. "Remember, it's about having fun. You've done the work. You've earned this moment." Ethan nodded, but his eyes betrayed his anxiety. Mark wasn't sure if Ethan truly believed in himself just yet, but that was okay. The journey wasn't over, and he had plenty of time to learn how to manage these feelings. Mark knew that the way Ethan responded to his nerves would teach him just as much as the game itself. Lily, on the other hand, was a bit more composed. She bounced the ball lightly in her hands, already in the zone. Mark had always admired Lily's ability to stay calm and focused, even when things got tense. It was her personality, steady, patient, and resilient. But even she had her moments of doubt, moments when she wasn't sure if she could keep up with the boys or if she was really cut out for the sport. "You ready?" Mark asked, putting a hand on her shoulder. Lily gave him a grin. "Yeah. Let's do this." The tournament was a local affair, but it felt big to the kids. There were other teams, and the gym was packed with parents and families. Mark had never really been to a competitive youth basketball game like this before. It was different from the practices, the moments in the driveway where the stakes were low and the only pressure was from themselves. Here, it was about winning and losing, and that created a different kind of tension. The first game was intense, and Mark could feel his chest tightening as he watched from the sidelines. His kids were nervous, but they played well. Ethan hit a few solid shots, and Lily showed off the dribbling skills they had worked on together. But it wasn't all smooth sailing, there were mistakes. Ethan missed a crucial free throw, and Lily got caught up in a fast break and turned the ball over. The other team was competitive, and the pace was fast. Mark could see that the pressure was starting to get to them, especially Ethan, who looked visibly frustrated with himself. But then Mark remembered something Michael had said, it's about staying calm in the storm. The best players keep their heads when things go wrong. And Mark could see that this was the real test, not their shooting or dribbling, but their ability to keep their cool and adjust to what was happening. At halftime, Mark pulled Ethan aside. The boy had been trying to push through his frustration, but it was clear that the pressure was getting to him. "Hey, what's going on?" Mark asked softly, crouching down to eye level with his son. "I just can't make a shot," Ethan said, his voice tinged with frustration. "I keep messing up." Mark nodded, understanding where his son was coming from. He knew the feeling all too well, the desire to do well, to succeed, and the frustration when things didn't go as planned. But it was in moments like this that the game taught the biggest lessons. "Ethan, you've worked so hard to get here. One bad shot doesn't define you. And it doesn't define this game," Mark said, looking into his son's eyes. "What's important is that you don't give up. You keep playing. You keep learning. And remember, it's not just about the shots, it's about how you react. If you miss, you get the next one. That's what makes you better." Ethan took a deep breath, nodding slowly. Mark patted him on the back. "Now, go out there and play your game." When the second half began, Ethan was a different player. He wasn't as tense anymore, and though he still missed a few shots, he didn't let it rattle him. He started playing with more confidence, passing the ball, getting his teammates involved. And when it was time for him to take another shot, he made it. It wasn't a perfect game, but it was enough to get the job done. The team's chemistry had started to shine through, and they were working together. Lily, too, had moments of brilliance in the second half. Her confidence had grown, and though she wasn't making every move perfectly, she was moving with purpose. She took the ball to the hoop, drawing a foul, and made 2 free throws in the final moments of the game that helped seal the win for their team. Mark's heart swelled with pride as he watched them play, not because they were winning, but because they were showing resilience, determination, and teamwork. They were learning how to respond to the pressure in a way that would serve them long after the game was over. By the time the final whistle blew, their team had won, but Mark didn't focus on the scoreboard. It wasn't the victory that stood out to him, it was the way his kids had handled themselves. The game had been tough, but they had kept their heads, supported each other, and stayed calm under pressure. That was the lesson Mark had been trying to teach them all along. Basketball was more than just physical skill. It was about mental toughness, focus, and learning from mistakes. As the kids celebrated with their teammates, Mark walked to the sidelines, leaning against the wall. He could see the pride on Ethan's face as he high-fived his teammates, and Lily was beaming with happiness as she exchanged hugs with the other girls on the team. Mark knew that this win wasn't just about the trophy or the accolades, it was about what they had learned. And he realized that, in that moment, everything they had worked for had come together. Michael Jordan's words had played a part in their journey, but it was the kids' hard work and willingness to push through that had made all the difference. Later, as they sat in the car heading home, Mark turned to them, his voice full of pride. "You guys did amazing today. Not just because you won, but because you kept going, no matter what. That's what's going to get you where you want to go." Ethan grinned. "Thanks, Dad. That really helped." Lily nodded, her voice full of excitement. "Yeah, I couldn't believe I made those free throws." Mark smiled, feeling that familiar warmth in his chest. It wasn't just about basketball. It was about teaching them how to live life with the same attitude, the same resilience. And he knew that no matter where their paths took them, they would always carry those lessons with them, on and off the court. The days following the tournament felt different. Mark could sense a shift in his kids, a new level of self-assurance that wasn't there before. Ethan, who had struggled with self-doubt, was now practicing with more confidence. He was shooting more consistently, and he was taking risks, something he had been hesitant to do in the past. Lily, too, seemed to have found her rhythm. She was less worried about making mistakes and more focused on enjoying the game. Mark could see that the tournament had done something for them, something more than just winning a few games. It had given them a sense of purpose, a deeper understanding of what it meant to really commit to something. Mark had always known that his kids had potential. But he also knew that potential wasn't enough on its own. It took effort, discipline, and a willingness to fail. It wasn't just about perfecting a shot or learning new moves, it was about the heart that went into it. And that was the lesson he had always tried to impart. The true value of basketball wasn't in winning, it was in how you played the game. This idea had started to resonate with Ethan and Lily in ways that Mark had only hoped for. As the weeks passed, their practices became more intense. Mark would take them to the local gym to shoot around, pushing them to refine their skills. The weather was turning colder, so they spent more time indoors, and while Mark had once worried about being too strict, he now saw the results. Ethan, especially, had embraced the challenge. He was running drills on his own, working on his form, and pushing himself to be better. He had stopped worrying so much about the outcome of each play and started focusing on the process. It was something Mark had hoped for but didn't expect so soon. Lily had grown in other ways. She was no longer just trying to keep up with the boys at practice. She was developing her own style, finding ways to assert herself on the court. She wasn't afraid to take a shot when she saw the opportunity, and she had become one of the best passers on the team. Mark was particularly proud of her for this. She had always been a little more reserved, more inclined to shy away from confrontation, but now she was stepping up in ways he hadn't imagined. He knew this had to be more than just the physical aspects of the game, it had to be a mental shift. She was learning to believe in herself, to trust her instincts. One Saturday afternoon, Mark decided to take the family to a local basketball game at the community center. It wasn't a professional game, just a local league, but Mark thought it would be a good opportunity for Ethan and Lily to see how others played. The community center was filled with families and kids, and Mark watched as his children eagerly took in the action. It wasn't the most polished game he had ever seen, but there was something about the energy in the room that made Mark appreciate the game in a different way. The players were giving it their all, working together as a team, and the crowd cheered every time someone made a play. As the game went on, Ethan and Lily became more animated. They pointed out things they'd learned in their practices, discussing the players' strengths and weaknesses. For Mark, it was a revelation to see them not just observing the game but analyzing it, picking up on nuances that they hadn't noticed before. They were no longer just watching basketball, they were understanding it. Mark realized that this was the natural progression of everything he had been trying to teach them. Basketball wasn't just a pastime, it was a way of thinking, a way of approaching challenges with determination and strategy. After the game, Mark took Ethan and Lily aside and talked to them about what they had seen. "What did you think of the game?" he asked. "It was pretty cool," Ethan said, his voice filled with excitement. "They weren't perfect, but they kept playing hard." "Yeah," Lily added, "I liked how they didn't give up when they made a mistake. They just kept going." Mark smiled, proud of how far they had come. "That's the spirit of the game," he said. "Basketball is full of mistakes, but it's not about avoiding them. It's about how you respond when things don't go right. That's where the real growth happens." Ethan and Lily nodded, taking in the lesson. Mark could see it in their eyes, they were beginning to get it. It wasn't just about the games. It was about the mentality behind everything they did. Winning wasn't the only measure of success. What mattered more was how you played, how you dealt with setbacks, and how you kept pushing forward. The next week, Mark took them back to the gym for another round of drills. This time, Ethan seemed more focused than usual. He was working on his jump shot, taking his time, adjusting his form, and practicing the things Michael had shown him. Mark could see the determination in his son's eyes. He had stopped worrying about the outcome of each shot and was more focused on perfecting the process. Mark could tell that this was a turning point for Ethan. He was starting to see that success wasn't immediate. It was built through consistent effort, day after day. Lily, too, had grown more confident. She was trying new moves, practicing her ball handling skills, and even challenging Ethan during their one-on-one games. Mark noticed that she was starting to be more assertive, not just on the court, but in life. It was clear that the lessons from basketball were bleeding over into other aspects of her life. Mark had always known that sports had the potential to shape character, but now he was seeing it firsthand. His kids were becoming more resilient, more confident in their abilities. By the time the next tournament came around, Mark could see a noticeable difference in both of them. They weren't just playing for the win anymore, they were playing to improve, to push themselves further. They had both taken Michael's advice to heart. The pressure wasn't gone, but it had shifted. They were no longer afraid to make mistakes. Instead, they were embracing them as opportunities to learn and grow. The tournament was intense, and Mark could feel the excitement building as they played through each round. Ethan had become a more consistent scorer, and Lily was playing with a sense of purpose that was hard to ignore. The games were close, but Mark noticed that, as a team, they were starting to click in ways they hadn't before. They communicated better, supported each other, and focused on the process instead of just the end result. In the final game, with the score tied and only a few seconds left, Mark held his breath. Ethan had the ball, but he wasn't rushing. He was calm, taking his time, waiting for the right opportunity. He saw Lily open on the perimeter, and without hesitation, he passed her the ball. She took the shot. The ball soared through the air, and as time seemed to slow down, it hit nothing but net. The crowd erupted, and Mark could barely believe what he had just witnessed. It wasn't just the shot, it was everything that had led to that moment. The teamwork, the focus, the trust. They had won, but it wasn't the win that mattered most. It was the way they had played. The way they had approached each moment with composure, resilience, and heart. Mark looked at his kids, their faces beaming with pride. This wasn't just a victory in basketball, it was a victory in life. They had learned to handle pressure, to support each other, and to believe in themselves. Mark knew that this moment would stay with them long after the trophy was put away. As they left the gym, Mark put his arm around both Ethan and Lily. "I'm proud of you too," he said. "Not just because you won, but because of how you played the game. You've learned what really matters, and that's something no one can take away from you." They smiled, exhausted but happy, and Mark realized that everything he had hoped for was beginning to come true. They were growing, not just as basketball players, but as people. And that, more than any trophy, was the greatest victory of all. The weeks following the tournament brought new challenges and fresh growth. Mark had always believed in the power of basketball as a vehicle for life lessons, but now, seeing how it was shaping Ethan and Lily, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride. They weren't just becoming better athletes, they were becoming better people, more focused, more disciplined, and more confident in themselves. Ethan had grown especially since that final game. His performance in the tournament had earned him praise from his teammates, and Mark could see that the recognition had given Ethan a new level of belief in his abilities. The pressure to perform still lingered, but he had learned to manage it. The game wasn't just about the outcome anymore, it was about how you played, how you handled mistakes, and how you could bounce back when things didn't go your way. This mental shift had made him more mature on and off the court. Lily, too, had transformed. Though her growth had been more subtle, it was just as significant. She was no longer the shy girl who hesitated to take the ball to the hoop. She was becoming a more assertive player, unafraid to make decisions and push herself. Mark had noticed how, in practice, she had started taking the initiative more. Where she once passed up opportunities to shoot or lead plays, she was now stepping up without hesitation. The confidence she had developed through basketball was spilling into other areas of her life, and it made Mark's heart swell with pride. Despite the improvements, Mark knew that the road ahead wasn't going to be easy. The game they loved came with its own set of challenges, injuries, setbacks, and, most importantly, the constant pressure to perform. Mark also understood that the excitement they felt now, after their tournament victory, might not last forever. There would be times when they felt defeated or frustrated. But he was hopeful. The lessons they had learned, the importance of perseverance, the power of teamwork, the value of hard work, would carry them through. One Saturday afternoon, Mark received a call from the local youth basketball league. It was an invitation to join a regional tournament. The stakes were higher, the competition tougher, and the level of play more intense. Mark knew this would be another challenge for the kids, one that would test everything they had learned up until now. But he also knew that they were ready. This tournament would give them the chance to take everything they had practiced and see how it stood up against stronger teams. It would be a true test of their skills and of their character. As the day of the tournament approached, Mark spent more time refining their practice routines. He wasn't just teaching them new drills, he was preparing them mentally. He reminded them again and again that it wasn't about the outcome, it was about playing with heart and not letting the pressure overwhelm them. He encouraged them to stay focused, to communicate on the court, and to support one another. He also made sure they knew that no matter what happened, he was proud of their progress. Mark's message seemed to resonate. Ethan, usually the more anxious of the two, took the challenge in stride. He worked tirelessly to improve his defense, his passing, and his shooting. He knew the other teams would be tough, but he wasn't intimidated. He felt ready. Lily, too, was focused. She had always been determined, but now her confidence had taken a leap. She practiced her dribbling and footwork with purpose, determined to be a key player in the tournament. On the day of the tournament, Mark could feel the nervous energy in the air. The gym was packed, the air thick with anticipation. Teams were warming up, coaches shouting instructions, and parents chatting excitedly in the stands. Mark stood by the side, watching his kids as they suited up. His heart was pounding, but he tried to keep his focus. This was their moment, and he knew they were ready to seize it. The first game was intense. The team they were up against was fast, and they had a couple of skilled players who made it difficult for Mark's team to get into a rhythm. But instead of getting frustrated, Mark saw something remarkable. Ethan stayed calm, working the ball around, setting up plays, and communicating with his teammates. Lily showed off her newfound assertiveness, dribbling past defenders and driving to the basket. They weren't playing perfectly, but they were playing together. They were supporting each other, encouraging each other when things went wrong, and celebrating their small victories. By halftime, the score was close. Mark could see that the kids were starting to feel the weight of the competition. The pressure was there, and some of the kids were beginning to show signs of stress. Ethan missed a couple of shots, and Lily got caught in a defensive scramble, allowing the opposing team to score easily. But Mark didn't let the negativity settle in. He called a timeout and gathered the team together. "Listen up," Mark said, his voice calm but firm. "You've got the skills. You've got the heart. But what you need right now is to stay focused. Don't worry about the score. Don't worry about the mistakes you've made. Keep playing your game. Keep working together. And remember, it's not just about the win, it's about how you respond when things get tough." The kids nodded, absorbing their coach's words. Mark could tell they were listening, and as they returned to the court, they seemed to move with more purpose. They weren't as frantic anymore. They played with more composure, relying on their practice and their teamwork. Slowly, they started to pull ahead. It wasn't the perfect game, they still made mistakes, but they handled each one with grace. They weren't letting the pressure shake them. When the final buzzer went off, their team had won. The kids erupted into cheers, high-fiving and hugging each other. Mark stood there, watching them, his chest swelling with pride. This wasn't just a victory for the team, it was a victory for the lessons they had learned together. Ethan and Lily weren't just basketball players now, they were resilient, focused, and calm under pressure. The win was sweet, but what mattered more was how they had played the game. As the team celebrated, Mark took a moment to reflect. He had been worried about how they would handle this new level of competition, but what he had seen today reassured him. His kids were growing, not just in basketball, but in character. They had learned to handle the pressure, to stay composed, and to trust each other. They had learned that success wasn't just about scoring points or winning games, it was about how you played the game, how you treated your teammates, and how you dealt with adversity. The tournament wasn't over yet, but Mark knew that no matter what happened in the next games, this day had been a success. His kids had learned that they were capable of more than they thought. And they had learned that their potential was not determined by the scoreboard. In the days that followed, Mark watched as Ethan and Lily continued to practice, not with the same nervous energy they had before, but with a quiet confidence that came from knowing they could face whatever challenge lay ahead. They weren't just playing for the win anymore. They were playing for the love of the game. And that, Mark realized, was the greatest victory of all. As the weeks continued, Mark's kids, Ethan and Lily, carried with them the lessons from the tournament and their growing understanding of the game. They weren't just focusing on the physical aspects of basketball anymore, they were learning how to think the game through, how to remain calm when things didn't go as planned, and how to stay focused on the long-term goals. Mark had seen them grow in these areas, and it filled him with pride. But there was still one thing that lingered on his mind. How would they respond to real adversity? Mark's own journey had been shaped by overcoming adversity, from balancing work and family life to pushing through the challenges of being a single father. He knew that life would throw them challenges just as it had thrown him. But how would his kids handle the real setbacks, the moments when things didn't go their way, when the road wasn't smooth, and when victory didn't seem possible? It wasn't long before that question was answered. The next tournament was fast approaching, and Mark could see a shift in the dynamics of his children's play. They were excited but also apprehensive. The last tournament had gone well, but this one would be tougher. They were facing teams with more experienced players and had to confront the pressure of expectations. Ethan had spent hours practicing his shots and trying to perfect his passing. Lily had worked tirelessly on her defense and her quick decision-making. Mark was impressed by their work ethic, but there was something different about the tension they felt this time. The stakes had been raised, and they knew it. Mark reminded them of what they had learned, but deep down, he understood that there was only so much he could prepare them for. Life, like basketball, had a way of throwing unexpected challenges at you. What mattered most was how you responded to those challenges. He had seen his kids step up in small ways before, but now they were going to face a new level of pressure. He didn't want them to expect perfection. He just wanted them to show up, give their best, and learn from every experience. The tournament started off well. Ethan's confidence had carried over from the previous competition. He was playing with more assurance, taking shots when they needed him and helping his teammates with key assists. Lily, too, was playing well. She was aggressive on defense, tracking the ball, and finding ways to disrupt the opposing players' movements. She was no longer just a support player, she was a contributor. Mark could see that they were growing, and he couldn't help but feel proud. But then, in the middle of the second game, everything started to unravel. They were up by a comfortable lead when, suddenly, the other team found their rhythm. The shots that had once been easy for Ethan now seemed to miss. Lily, who had been confident, found herself caught up in the speed of the game and began making mistakes she hadn't made in weeks. The opposing team wasn't just playing well, they were playing aggressively, putting Mark's team on their heels. Mark watched as Ethan missed a shot he would have usually made. His frustration was evident on his face, and he started rushing his plays, trying to make up for the mistakes he'd made. Lily, on the other hand, was struggling to keep up. She had always been a solid defender, but the pressure of the game was starting to get to her. Mark could see the tension building, the stress mounting. They weren't just facing another tough team, they were facing themselves, their own doubts and insecurities. When the final buzzer rang, their team had lost. Mark stood there for a moment, absorbing the weight of it. It wasn't just the loss, it was how his kids had handled it. Ethan and Lily were disappointed, but it was clear they were processing the experience in different ways. Ethan walked off the court, his shoulders slumped. Lily sat down on the bench, holding her head in her hands, trying to hold back tears. Mark could see that they were both struggling, but it wasn't the failure that bothered them. It was the feeling of not being enough. He knew that this moment would define them. They had been on a high after their last win, but now they were facing their first true loss, and they had to learn how to pick themselves up. He knew they had the ability to bounce back, but it would take more than just a pep talk. They needed to understand that failure wasn't the end. It was a part of the process, a step toward growth. Mark waited until the gym cleared out, then approached his kids. They were sitting on the bench, still quiet and lost in their thoughts. He could feel the weight of their disappointment, but he didn't rush to comfort them with empty words. "You guys okay?" he asked, sitting down next to them. Ethan looked at him, his eyes tired and frustrated. "I just couldn't make a shot when it mattered." Lily nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "I kept messing up my defense. I should have done better." Mark smiled softly. "Yeah, you could have done better. And that's okay. But here's the thing, this loss doesn't mean you're not good enough. It just means you've got more to learn. This is a step, not a stop. You'll get better. But you have to be willing to learn from it." Ethan was silent for a moment before he finally spoke. "I don't want to let you down, Dad." Mark felt a pang in his chest. He reached over and placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "You didn't let me down, buddy. You've never let me down. You gave it your all out there. And that's all I can ask for. The rest will come, but you've got to keep learning. It's all about how you bounce back from this. Not every game is going to go the way you want it to. But that's not what matters." Lily looked up at him, her eyes wide. "How do we bounce back, though? It feels so bad." Mark nodded. "I get it. It sucks. But this is the real lesson. The lesson isn't in the win, it's in how you come back from the loss. You'll feel bad, and that's okay. But don't let it define you. Tomorrow, we get back to work. We learn from today, and we keep pushing forward. I know it hurts now, but you'll look back on this and realize how much it's helped you grow." Ethan wiped his eyes, and Lily gave a small nod. Mark could see the fire inside them wasn't extinguished, it had just been hidden under their disappointment. They weren't giving up, they were just learning what it felt like to lose, really lose, for the first time. As they left the gym, Mark put his arm around both of them. "You're both going to be fine. In fact, you'll be better because of this. So don't dwell on the loss too long. Think about what you'll do next time." The car ride home was quiet, but it wasn't the same silence as before. It wasn't sadness, it was reflection. Mark could sense that they were already starting to process what had happened, and he knew this moment would be a turning point for them. They had faced their first real loss together, and it hadn't broken them. It had only strengthened their resolve. Mark had no doubt that his kids would bounce back. The lessons they had learned in that gym would stay with them longer than any trophy or win could. And in that moment, Mark realized that the journey they were on wasn't just about basketball. It was about life, about facing adversity, and about pushing through the hard times with the same determination that had gotten them this far. The weeks after the tournament loss were filled with quiet moments of reflection for Mark, Ethan, and Lily. They had spent a lot of time processing the defeat, but the sting had begun to fade. The lessons learned were becoming clearer, and Mark could sense that his kids were maturing in ways he hadn't expected. Ethan, who had once been his most anxious child, now had a renewed focus. He wasn't as quick to dismiss mistakes, but instead was analyzing them, figuring out how to avoid repeating them. Lily, always determined, had grown more resilient, not just in basketball, but in the way she approached challenges in life. Mark saw them each taking a small step forward, even in their moments of doubt. This was exactly what he had hoped for. He had never wanted to push them to be perfect, he had just wanted them to understand the process. Basketball, like life, wasn't about avoiding failure. It was about facing it head-on, learning from it, and using it to fuel the next step. One afternoon, Mark decided to take them back to the community center where they had watched the local game a few weeks ago. This time, the atmosphere was different. Ethan and Lily were eager, almost buzzing with anticipation. They had been practicing diligently on their own and felt more prepared for whatever challenges the game might throw at them. As they arrived, Mark noticed a change in their demeanor. The nervousness that had plagued their previous games was replaced by a quiet confidence. They weren't walking into the gym with the expectation of winning. They were walking in with the understanding that they could face whatever happened, win or lose, and learn from it. It was a subtle, but powerful shift. The game itself wasn't easy. The competition was fierce, and there were moments when things didn't go their way. Mark saw the tension rise in Ethan as he missed a few key shots early on. Lily, too, found herself in a tight spot, struggling to break past a particularly aggressive defender. But what stood out to Mark was their reaction. Instead of getting frustrated or rushing their plays, they stayed calm. Ethan adjusted his stance, taking the time to focus on each shot. Lily, in her own way, dug in, taking a deep breath and waiting for the right moment to make her move. There was a clarity to their play that Mark hadn't seen before, a quiet determination that told him they were ready for this. When the final buzzer sounded, their team had won by a narrow margin, but the victory felt different this time. It wasn't about the score, it was about how they had played. They had stuck together through the tough moments, leaned on each other, and worked as a team. Mark stood at the sidelines, watching his kids, and a sense of pride washed over him. They had learned to trust in their skills, trust in each other, and trust in the process of growth. As the team gathered after the game, Mark saw the smiles on Ethan and Lily's faces. They weren't just smiling because they had won, they were smiling because they knew they had earned it. They had faced adversity, and instead of shrinking away, they had fought through it. And in doing so, they had grown, not just as players, but as people. Later that evening, as they drove home, Mark asked them how they felt about the game. "It felt good," Ethan said, his voice steady. "I was nervous at first, but I kept telling myself to just focus on the next play. I think that helped." Lily nodded in agreement. "Yeah, I didn't let one mistake mess me up. I just kept moving forward." Mark smiled at them, proud of how far they had come. "You guys did great. You didn't just play the game, you played it with heart. That's what matters." Ethan turned to his dad. "Do you think we could get to a point where we're ready for the next level? Like, playing at a higher competition?" Mark considered the question. "You know, you're already playing at a high level. But it's not about the next level of competition, it's about the next level of who you are. Keep working, stay focused, and keep getting better. The competition will follow. But don't worry about that just yet. Keep playing for the love of the game, for each other. The rest will take care of itself." Ethan and Lily sat quietly, letting their dad's words sink in. Mark could tell they understood what he meant. They had spent so much time focused on the result, the winning, that they hadn't fully embraced the journey. But now, they were starting to get it. It wasn't about the outcome of each game. It was about how they handled each moment, each challenge, each mistake. The next few weeks were filled with more practices, more games, and more opportunities to improve. Ethan continued working on his shooting, pushing himself harder with each attempt. He focused on the process instead of the pressure. Lily, too, continued refining her skills, but what Mark noticed more than anything was her mental game. She had stopped worrying about what others thought of her performance and had started playing with more confidence. One evening, after a particularly tough practice, Mark pulled them aside. "You guys are doing great," he said, watching them catch their breath. "But remember, it's not just about basketball. It's about everything. The work you're putting in now is going to show up in other areas of your life, too. Whether it's school, friendships, or anything else, what you learn in basketball translates. It's all connected." They nodded, understanding that basketball wasn't just a game, it was a way of thinking, a way of approaching challenges. As the days went on, Mark saw more and more that his kids were developing into not just good players, but good people. They weren't perfect, but they were learning how to be resilient, how to handle failure, and how to persevere when things got tough. Mark knew that these were the lessons that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. As the next tournament approached, Mark didn't feel the same sense of pressure he had before. This time, it wasn't about the victory. It was about seeing how far they had come, how much they had grown. And though there was always the desire to win, Mark realized that the true reward was in the process, and watching his children develop not just as basketball players, but as individuals. When the tournament arrived, the competition was fierce. Their team played hard, and the games were close. But Mark wasn't worried about the outcome. He watched as his kids handled each moment with calm, with focus, and with heart. They weren't just playing to win, they were playing to improve. And no matter what happened on the court, Mark knew that they had already won. By the time the final game arrived, Mark could see it in their eyes. They were ready, not just for the challenge in front of them, but for whatever came next. The game was intense, with both teams fighting tooth and nail for every point. But Mark's kids had learned how to trust in the process, how to play with heart, and how to keep pushing, no matter what. As the final buzzer went off, Mark stood at the sidelines, watching his kids. The outcome didn't matter. They had played the game the right way, through teamwork, through perseverance, and through love for the game. Mark realized that this was what it had all been about. Not just the victories, but the journey that had shaped them into the people they were becoming. That night, after the game, as they packed up their gear and prepared to head home, Mark looked at his kids with a smile. "You guys did amazing today," he said. "You didn't just win, you became better players and better people. I'm proud of you." Ethan and Lily grinned, the pride in their eyes undeniable. They hadn't just won a game, they had won something much more important, the understanding that the lessons they were learning on the court would last long after the game was over. And in that moment, Mark knew that everything he had hoped for had come true. As the months passed, Mark began to notice something even more profound happening within his children. Ethan and Lily had always enjoyed basketball, but now, it seemed to occupy a different place in their lives. It was no longer just a hobby or a pastime, it had become a part of who they were. The dedication they had developed, not just to the game, but to each other and themselves, was clear in the way they carried themselves off the court. They had learned not only to handle success, but also how to rise from failure. It wasn't about being perfect, it was about being persistent. For Mark, it had been a humbling experience. He'd spent so many years trying to balance work, life, and raising his kids, all while holding onto the dream of sharing his love for basketball with them. But what had begun as a simple father-son and daughter tradition had transformed into something much deeper. They had created their own bond, built on effort, trust, and shared experiences. Watching Ethan and Lily grow, not just as players but as people, had filled Mark with a sense of pride he never thought possible. One Saturday morning, Mark found himself sitting at the kitchen table, his coffee cooling in front of him. Ethan and Lily had already gone outside to practice, their enthusiasm as palpable as it had ever been. Mark had thought about joining them, but today, something felt different. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't worried about their progress. He wasn't concerned about how they would perform at the next game or if they would hit their shots. What mattered more now was their growth as individuals. He knew that basketball had given them a sense of purpose, but it was also giving them the tools to approach life with the same determination they applied to their sport. Mark looked out the window, watching his kids shoot hoops in the driveway. They were laughing, taking shots, encouraging each other. Their bond had become something deeper, something that transcended the game. It was evident that basketball had become a way of life for them. It wasn't just about the next tournament, the next win, it was about the joy of improving, of working together to overcome challenges. But as with any journey, there were still moments of uncertainty. It was easy to get caught up in the excitement of victories, but how would they handle the inevitable obstacles ahead? Mark knew that as they grew older, they would face new challenges, on and off the court. They would encounter moments where basketball would take a back seat to other life events. College decisions, friendships, and new responsibilities would all demand their attention. But Mark believed in them. He believed in their ability to adapt, to learn, and to grow, not just in basketball but in life. That afternoon, as Mark joined Ethan and Lily in the driveway, he could see that their confidence had grown even more. Ethan, who had once hesitated to take tough shots, was now taking risks with his play. His shot was more consistent, his dribbling sharper. Lily, too, had developed a quiet confidence in her game. She was no longer the player who shied away from contact or feared making a mistake. She was aggressive, driven, and focused. Mark had watched the transformation happen slowly but surely, and he couldn't help but feel proud. As they practiced together, Mark saw something new, an understanding between them. It wasn't just about drills or refining their techniques anymore. It was about playing with heart. Mark had spent years trying to teach them the fundamentals of the game, but now, it seemed like they were teaching him something in return. They were showing him the importance of enjoying the process, of taking joy in the journey instead of focusing only on the destination. He realized that he had spent so much time pushing them to improve that he had neglected to teach them how to embrace the game for what it was. Basketball wasn't just about the outcome, it was about the experience. The next big game was just around the corner, a regional competition that would bring together some of the most competitive teams they had faced yet. Mark could feel the tension in the air as they began preparing for it. Ethan and Lily had been practicing every chance they got, each one pushing themselves a little harder than the last time. The games had been getting more intense, and Mark could see that they were beginning to feel the weight of expectations. But Mark wasn't concerned. He had seen how much they had grown, not just in their skills, but in their approach to the game. It wasn't about the competition anymore. It was about playing the game for the right reasons, because they loved it, because they had worked for it, and because they had the courage to keep pushing forward no matter the outcome. When the day of the competition arrived, Mark could see the nervous energy building up in Ethan and Lily. They had been looking forward to this moment, but now that it was here, they were feeling the pressure. It was hard not to get caught up in the excitement, the expectations, and the fear of failure. But Mark knew this moment would teach them something valuable, not just about basketball, but about themselves. The first game was a hard-fought battle. Both teams played with intensity, and it was clear that the competition was tougher than anything they had faced before. Ethan missed a couple of critical shots, and Lily found herself stuck in tight defensive situations. But through it all, Mark could see the growth in their ability to stay calm. They didn't let the pressure overwhelm them. When things got difficult, they dug deep, relied on their teammates, and fought back. It wasn't always pretty, but they were playing with the heart and determination they had cultivated over the months. In the final moments of the game, with the score tied and the clock winding down, Mark could feel the tension building. Ethan had the ball. He looked around the court, scanning for an open teammate, but there was nothing. The shot clock was winding down. Ethan had to take the shot. Mark held his breath as his son lined up for a three-pointer, knowing this could be the defining moment of the game. Ethan took the shot, the ball sailing through the air. It hit the rim and bounced out. For a moment, Mark's heart sank. But as the ball rolled out of bounds, he noticed something. Ethan didn't hang his head. He didn't sulk or turn away from the court. Instead, he walked back to his teammates, a look of determination on his face. The game wasn't over. They had a chance to regroup, to finish strong. And that's exactly what they did. In the final seconds, Lily made a crucial steal, passing the ball to Ethan, who found the open man for a game-winning shot. The crowd erupted as they won the game in the final seconds. It wasn't just the victory that mattered, it was how they had handled the adversity, how they had worked together and trusted each other through the tough moments. Mark saw it in their eyes. This wasn't about the win. It was about the journey. The lessons had come full circle, and they were finally starting to understand that what mattered wasn't how many games they won, but how they played the game. After the game, as they walked to the car, Mark looked at his kids. They weren't talking about the victory. They were talking about the plays they had missed, the adjustments they needed to make, and how they could improve next time. Mark smiled to himself, realizing that this moment wasn't about the trophy they had earned. It was about the lessons they had learned. The journey they had taken to get here wasn't just about basketball, it was about life. And that was the true victory. The drive home after the tournament win was quieter than Mark expected. Ethan and Lily sat in the back seat, their heads pressed against the window, lost in their thoughts. Mark couldn't help but smile to himself as he drove, the faint hum of the tires on the road the only sound breaking the silence. The victory was sweet, but it wasn't the win that filled him with pride. It was how they had gotten there. He'd watched his kids grow, not just as basketball players, but as individuals, as teammates. They had learned to handle failure, to bounce back from disappointment, and to trust in themselves and each other. They had spent years chasing something, pushing themselves to be better, to overcome challenges both on and off the court. And while this victory was a testament to their hard work, it was the lessons along the way that would shape them for years to come. Mark glanced in the rearview mirror at Ethan, who seemed lost in thought, and at Lily, who was quietly smiling to herself. Mark knew they had learned something far greater than how to shoot a basketball or make a perfect pass. They had learned the value of persistence, the importance of teamwork, and the understanding that every setback was simply an opportunity to grow. As they neared home, Mark broke the silence. "You both played amazing today," he said, his voice full of warmth. "You didn't just win the game. You won something much bigger." Ethan turned his head slightly, his eyes meeting Mark's in the rearview mirror. "It wasn't just the win, was it, Dad?" Mark smiled, proud that Ethan had understood. "Exactly. It's about everything that led up to this moment. The practices, the struggles, the mistakes, it all mattered. You two showed today that it's not about being perfect, it's about giving your best and learning along the way. That's the real victory." Lily, who had been quietly observing the conversation, chimed in. "And we couldn't have done it without each other. I mean, we made mistakes, but we didn't give up. We kept helping each other." Mark's heart swelled with pride as he glanced over at her. "That's right. You worked as a team. And that's what basketball is all about, working together to overcome obstacles." The conversation shifted as they pulled into the driveway. The victory wasn't just a mark of success, it was the culmination of all the time they had spent growing together. For the first time in a long while, Mark felt like his job was done. Not because the work was over, but because they had become the people he had always hoped they would be, confident, resilient, and ready to face whatever challenges came their way. That night, as Mark sat on the porch, watching the sun set behind the trees, he found himself reflecting on how much had changed in the past year. It felt like a lifetime ago when he first started teaching Ethan and Lily basketball in the driveway, just trying to give them something meaningful to bond over. They had come so far, and the lessons they had learned together had shaped not only their game but their lives. Mark thought back to those early days, when basketball had been an escape for him. A way to deal with his own frustrations and his dreams of something bigger. But as he watched his children grow into young adults, he realized that the game had been a bridge. It had connected him with them, it had given them a shared purpose, and it had taught them what it meant to work for something, to fail, and then to rise again. As the days went on, basketball became less of a focus in their lives. Ethan and Lily were getting older, and other interests and responsibilities started to take center stage. But the foundation had been laid. They carried with them the lessons from their time on the court, the value of teamwork, perseverance, and the importance of having each other's backs. They knew now that whether it was basketball or life, success wasn't about getting everything right, it was about the effort, the heart, and the willingness to push through the tough times. Months later, Mark watched from the sidelines as Ethan and Lily competed in another tournament. This time, Mark wasn't as tense as he had been in previous games. He knew his kids had grown beyond just winning. They were now playing with a new sense of freedom, of joy. They weren't as concerned with the outcome, they were enjoying the game for what it was. And that, Mark knew, was the ultimate victory. Ethan, now a young teenager, was leading his team through a tough game. His confidence had grown over the years, but it wasn't arrogance. It was a quiet assurance that came from knowing he had worked for every skill, every shot, and every pass. Lily was in the mix too, playing with the same composure and determination she had always shown, but now with a deeper sense of self. They were no longer just trying to prove themselves. They were playing because they loved the game and because they knew that no matter the outcome, they had each other's backs. After the game, win or lose, Mark watched them exchange high fives with their teammates. He smiled to himself, realizing that this was the real victory. They had learned to play the game with heart, not for the recognition or the trophies, but for the love of it. It was a lesson that had transcended the basketball court and had become a part of who they were. They had learned that the most important thing in life was not how often you won, but how you faced every challenge, whether it was on the court or off of it. As they walked off the court together, Mark felt a quiet pride. He didn't need to say anything. He didn't need to congratulate them again. He could see it in their eyes. They knew how far they had come. And Mark knew that no matter where life took them, they would always have the lessons from those long afternoons spent practicing basketball together. That night, after the game, the family sat down for a quiet dinner. There were no discussions of points or plays. It wasn't about how many shots they had made or missed. It was just about being together. The bond they had forged through basketball had become something even stronger, something that would carry them through whatever came next in their lives. Ethan and Lily were no longer the children who had first picked up a basketball with their dad. They had grown into young adults, each with their own dreams and aspirations. But what Mark realized, sitting at the dinner table, was that basketball had given them something even more important than the skills they had developed. It had given them a shared experience, a sense of teamwork that would last far beyond any game. It had taught them the value of working hard, of pushing through adversity, and of finding joy in the journey, not just the destination. Mark watched as Ethan and Lily talked and laughed with each other, and he knew, deep down, that everything they had learned together would stay with them. It wasn't just the skills that made them good players, it was the lessons they had learned about themselves, about their family, and about life. They had learned how to face challenges with resilience, how to support one another, and how to keep moving forward, no matter what. For Mark, the journey had come full circle. He had started as a father trying to teach his kids something he loved. But what he had given them, and what they had given him, was far greater than anything he had ever expected. Basketball had been the bridge, but the lessons they had learned together were the foundation of something far more lasting. And as Mark looked at his kids, he realized that their greatest victories were not in the games they had won, but in the people they had become along the way.